She fled with her son into the deep forest, thinking she was escaping the lies. But in an abandoned house in the crater, she learned something that turned everything upside down. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. Laura Miller had never been the kind of woman who expected her life to fall apart quietly. She had always believed that if something went wrong, truly wrong, it would arrive with noise, with storms, with signs she could see or interpret. But the truth, as she had come to understand over the past few weeks, was far more subtle. Some storms brewed in silence. Some cracks appeared before she even realized she'd stepped on unstable ground. And some emotional earthquakes, she now knew, happened entirely inside the heart, leaving nothing visible on the surface. She sat in the passenger seat of her own car, watching the world blur past through the window as her sister drove. She had left the house in a fury that still embarrassed her, but even now, when she replayed that scene, her raised voice, her shaken hands, her husband Daniel's stunned expression, she felt that same mixture of anger and wounded pride. She had been so certain he was hiding something from her. The late-night messages, the hushed phone calls, the sudden distance in the way he kissed her goodnight. She had not needed proof. Her imagination had supplied all of it. And yet, the more she tried to hold on to that certainty, the more it slipped through her fingers like sand. Her 7-year-old son sat in the back seat, his small legs swinging, trying to see the world through the crack between the front seats. Sam never asked questions in the car, not when the adults were tense, but the weight of his silence had been heavy on her shoulders. She loved that child more than anything on earth, but the thought that she had dragged him into her emotional chaos filled her with guilt she could hardly bear. At her sister's house, she had pretended she was fine, pretended that everything was temporary, pretended that she wasn't unraveling. And in some small way, her sister had believed her, though the sympathetic glances, the extra cup of tea, the stay as long as you need, had made it clear that Laura's facade wasn't convincing anyone. It was Sam who finally brought everything to a halt. He had climbed into her lap one evening while she sat on the balcony, staring into the darkening street, wondering how her life had swerved so violently. He had wrapped his small arms around her waist and whispered, "Mom, when are we going home? Dad misses us." She had wanted to cry then, but she didn't. She had smoothed his hair and told him they just needed a little time away. But the truth carved itself deeper into her heart. She didn't even know what she wanted. She didn't know if she wanted forgiveness or confirmation. She didn't know if she wanted to fight or flee. She only knew she was tired. Tired of assuming. Tired of imagining the worst. Tired of the way fear twisted her love into suspicion. It was in the midst of that exhaustion that the idea of the hike appeared. It wasn't a logical solution, and she knew that. But the thought of the quiet woods, far away from the buzzing phone, the half-opened messages, the echo of arguments in her head, it felt like the only thing that could save her from drowning in her own mind. She told her sister she needed to go away for a while. Not far. Not forever. Just somewhere where the noise couldn't reach her. "Take Sam with you," her sister had said gently. "It'll be good for him too." And Laura, for the first time in weeks, felt a small spark of purpose. The next morning, she crowded a few things into a backpack, more than she needed in some ways, less than she needed in others. She bought a cheap camping kit at a nearby store, grabbed a map from a rotating rack by the door, and drove with Sam along the abandoned road that bordered the state forest. The pavement was cracked and uneven, as though nature itself had decided to reclaim the land. Trees leaned inward from both sides, creating long shadows that reached across the car hood. Sam stared out the window, wide-eyed with excitement. For him, this wasn't an escape. It was an adventure. It stung Lara a little. How easily he could find wonder while she struggled to disentangle her heart. The deeper they drove into the forest, the more the world seemed to loosen its grip on them. No traffic, no houses, no stores or rest stops. Just trees, endless and silent, towering like guardians. The GPS cut out first. Then the cell signal bars vanished altogether. Lara checked her phone once, twice, then tucked it away. A strange mixture of relief and fear settled inside her. When they reached the trailhead she had circled on the map, Sam hopped out of the car with a burst of energy that made her smile despite herself. He grabbed his tiny backpack, the one with a cartoon wolf on it, and studied the path ahead with exaggerated seriousness. "Mom, are we going to see animals?" "Maybe," she said, "if we're lucky." "Are we going to see a bear?" "Hopefully not that lucky." He laughed, and the sound felt like warm sunlight breaking through clouds. They began walking, and for the first hour, the trail was easy enough. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. Birds sang overhead. Sunlight slipped between branches in long golden threads. Lara felt some of her tension begin to unwind. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough that her breathing became slower, more measured. Sam chattered nonstop about school, about the comic book he'd read last night, about the raccoon they'd seen near the dumpsters earlier that week. His voice, high and light, filled the quiet spaces that would have otherwise become dangerous for Lara's thoughts. She found herself grateful for his chatter. They stopped near a fallen tree for lunch. The forest was alive around them, but peaceful. Sam sat on the log with his legs swinging, biting into a sandwich with exaggerated enthusiasm. Lara watched him with a soft smile, feeling for the first time in days that she could breathe without her chest tightening. "Mom," he said suddenly, his tone shifting. "Yes, sweetheart. I heard Dad on the phone a few days ago." Her hand froze halfway to her mouth. Sam looked at her with a seriousness that didn't belong on such a young face. He wasn't talking to a lady. The words hit her like a stone, heavy and cold. "He was talking to a store," Sam continued, "about something he wanted to order for you. I think it was a necklace. He said it was supposed to be a surprise." Lara stared at her son, the sandwich suddenly tasting like dust in her mouth. She opened her lips to say something, to deny, to question, to ask for more details, but the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt thick, her chest tight. She turned her face away from him slightly, blinking back tears. If what Sam said was true, then she had been wrong, terribly wrong. She had accused Daniel not out of certainty but out of fear. She had let old insecurities, old shadows from her past, crawl back into her heart. And instead of pushing them away, she had let them control her. But she couldn't process that yet. Not here. Not in front of her son. "That's nice of him," she said eventually, her voice thinner than she wanted it to be. Sam didn't seem to notice. He returned to eating, swinging his feet and humming to himself. Lara stared down at her own hands, feeling the weight of guilt settle deeper and deeper, like a stone sinking into water. They resumed their hike in silence, her heart heavier with every step. The forest was no longer peaceful. It was reflective, mirroring every thought she tried to suppress. And yet, as they walked, the forest seemed to pull them onward, deeper, as though guiding them toward something she didn't yet understand. 2 hours later, Sam stopped suddenly. "Mom!" he shouted. "Look!" Lara lifted her head, expecting another squirrel or bird. But what she saw stole the breath from her lungs. The trees ahead thinned out abruptly, and where the forest ended, the ground dipped into a colossal, perfectly circular crater. The earth curved inward in a steep bowl, the sides covered with loose gray soil and scattered rocks. It looked unnatural, as though it had been carved by a giant hand or an immense machine. But that wasn't the most shocking part. At the bottom of that vast crater, small and isolated, stood a house. A simple wooden house with faded paint and a small porch, its roof a muted orange that caught the weak afternoon sunlight. It was like seeing a photograph from another world, something surreal and out of place, something that didn't belong and yet stood there as though it always had. Sam's face lit up with exhilaration. "Whoa, can we go down there?" Lara grabbed his arm instinctively, her heart beating faster. "I don't know, honey." But Sam was already pulling forward, tugging her gently toward the edge. Curiosity stirred inside her, tangled with fear. The house was too strange, too improbable. And yet, the longer she stared, the more something inside her whispered that they hadn't stumbled upon this by accident. It was as if the forest had led them there, as if they were meant to find it. And though Lara didn't know it yet, descending into that crater would change everything: her past, her present, her heart, and the future she wasn't sure she still deserved. From the moment Lara tightened her grip on Sam's hand and stepped closer to the edge of the crater, she felt the shift inside herself. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. She had come into the forest searching for clarity, though she had not yet known what form clarity would take. Now, gazing at the impossible structure below, she sensed that the forest had answered in its own peculiar way. Whatever waited for them at the bottom of that vast bowl of earth, she could not walk away from it. Sam tugged at her sleeve again, breathless with excitement, and she found herself torn between warning him and being pulled along by his enthusiasm. The crater sloped in a long downward arc, its soil loose and crumbling under the smallest shift of weight. Just approaching the rim made her stomach clench. It was not fear of heights, not exactly. It was the uncanny feeling of standing on the edge of something unnatural, something that seemed carved more by intention than by time or nature. The sun was still high enough that light poured across the basin, illuminating every uneven stone and twisted root embedded in the slope. The house stood like a solitary island at the bottom, its faded boards almost blending into the muted earth around it. There were no paths leading down, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there for years. Yet the house itself seemed intact, in a way no abandoned structure ever was. Sam looked up at her with the intense curiosity only a child could possess. "Mom, we have to go see it. Nobody will believe us." Lara's first instinct, born of caution and maternal instinct, was to say no, but the words wouldn't leave her throat. Something about the silent house, sitting as though suspended in time, called to her. Perhaps it was the exhaustion she had been carrying for weeks. Perhaps it was the ache of being wrong about her husband, the weight of her pride and fear dragging behind her like a shadow. Or perhaps it was simply that she needed answers, any answers to something, even if they came from an inexplicable structure in the woods. She nodded slowly. "All right. But we go carefully. Very slowly. And you stay right with me." Sam beamed, and without waiting for further permission, he began searching for the safest route downward. Lara followed, scanning the slope for anything stable, though most of the ground seemed eager to give way. They moved sideways rather than straight down, feet angled, knees bent, and every step measured. Sam's small sneakers slid several times, sending miniature avalanches of pebbles spilling toward the bottom. Each slip made Lara's breath catch. She held the back of his jacket firmly, guiding him, bracing herself against the incline. Once, Sam's foot slipped so hard that he fell onto his palms with a startled gasp. Lara lunged instinctively, catching him before he could slide farther. He pressed a trembling hand to her arm, eyes wide. But after a moment he nodded bravely and pushed himself back to his feet. "It's okay," he said, though his voice wavered. "I know," she replied softly, "but hold on to me." The deeper they went, the more the forest above seemed to shrink. The ring of trees became a distant crown against the sky, and the crater itself turned into a world apart, a quiet bowl of earth insulated from the wind, from the rustling leaves, from anything that resembled the familiar. Even the air felt stiller, heavier, as though it had been waiting for them. By the time they reached the bottom, Lara's legs trembled from the effort and tension, but the sense of unease pressing against her ribs was stronger. Sam, however, shook himself off and stared at the house with awe. It was even stranger up close. The walls were made of old wood, bleached in places and darkened in others, as if sun and rain had fought over it for decades. The paint, whatever color it once had been, clung in flakes, leaving gray, splintered streaks. The roof tiles carried the soft orange tone she'd seen from above, but many were chipped or misaligned, as though someone had tried to repair them without proper tools. There was no mailbox, no path, no sign of recent footsteps or tire tracks. Nothing disturbed the thin layer of dust covering the ground around the porch. And yet, nothing about the house suggested true abandonment. It stood too confidently, too deliberately, like a secret that refused to be forgotten. Sam walked toward one of the windows and cupped his hands against the glass. "Mom, it's dark inside." "Really dark?" Lara joined him, leaning toward the window. Instead of the faint reflection or dim interior she expected, the window was completely black. Not dusty, not curtained pitch black, as if a thick coat of paint or heavy fabric covered it from within. She felt her heartbeat pick up uneasily. "Maybe it's boarded up inside," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't convinced. Sam didn't seem frightened. He darted toward the door, his curiosity far outweighing any sense of danger. Lara hurried to catch up, tugging him gently back. "Let me try the door," she said, wanting to place herself between him and whatever might wait inside. She placed her hand on the rusted doorknob. It felt strangely cool, despite the warm day. She twisted slowly, half expecting it to resist, half hoping it would. But it turned with surprising ease. The latch clicked, and the door swung open with a long, weary creak that sent a shiver down her spine. A wave of musty air washed over them. Dampness mixed with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. Sam wrinkled his nose, but his eyes glowed with excitement. Lara hesitated on the threshold. She felt as though she were crossing into another time rather than another building. The interior was far dimmer than it had appeared from the outside. Slivers of sunlight seeped through small gaps in the wooden boards, but the room was mostly swallowed in shadow. Lara took a small flashlight from her pack and flicked it on, sweeping its narrow beam across the space. The living room, if it could be called that, was surprisingly intact. A worn rug lay in the center, its pattern nearly erased by time. A pair of slippers sat neatly by the edge of an armchair, as though waiting for someone to step into them. On a small end table beside the chair rested a mug, the surface of the liquid inside reflecting a faint glimmer of light. Lara stepped closer, heart quickening. She leaned in and inhaled. The scent was faint but unmistakable coffee. Not fresh, but not stale either. Coffee that hadn't been there for years. Coffee that might have been poured hours ago. A chill moved down her spine. "Mom," Sam whispered, "how can it still be warm?" "It's not warm," Lara murmured, though she wasn't entirely sure. "But it's not old." She swept her flashlight across the fireplace. Above it hung a simple wooden frame containing a faded photograph. Lara lifted it gently. The image showed two people standing in front of the same house. Only it looked different, newer, standing on flat, open land, surrounded by trees, not sunken in a crater, not decayed. A knot of confusion tightened in her chest. "Mom, look!" Sam darted toward a small wooden horse on the shelf. This toy is old. Really old. Lara barely heard him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the photograph. Questions crowded her mind, none with answers. Why was the house moved? Who were these people? Where were they now? And then, something shifted. A quiet thump from upstairs, soft but distinct, like a footstep muffled by thick walls. Lara froze. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, but Sam's eyes widened as he stared at the ceiling. Mom, somebody's up there? Lara's skin prickled. She tightened her hold on the flashlight, instinctively stepping in front of her son. Maybe it's an animal, she whispered, though doubt filled her voice. Or something fell. No, it was walking. Sam's certainty made her stomach twist. She forced herself to breathe. They had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. Not without answers. Not without understanding this place. Stay close, she said, taking Sam's hand again. They moved deeper into the house, exploring each room with painstaking caution. Every space carried contradictions, dust mixed with fresh objects, decay mingling with signs of recent activity. A plate on the table held half a sandwich, yet the cloth beneath it had stiffened and wrinkled with time. A fruit bowl contained firm apples, but was coated in a thin layer of webbing. None of it made sense. At the back of the kitchen, where an old pantry should have been, Sam tugged on a small door. Mom, this one's different. Lara approached, her pulse drumming in her ears. She pulled the door open slowly, expecting shelves, jars, maybe more dust. Instead, the door revealed a narrow stone chamber. A tunnel of jagged rock yawned beyond it, carved by hand into the earth behind the house. A cold draft rolled out, carrying with it a metallic scent that made the hairs on her arms rise. Sam's voice trembled with awe and fear. Where does it go? Lara didn't know. But as she stared into the rough-hewn darkness, she sensed that whatever lay beyond those steps would unravel the mystery that had pulled them here. Something deeper than the crater, older than the house, something hidden deliberately, perhaps desperately. She swallowed hard. We'll have to find out. The flashlight beam quivered slightly as she lifted it. Sam moved closer, clutching her arm. The whole house seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for what would come next. And with that, Lara stepped into the tunnel. Not the slightest idea how profoundly her life would change by the time she emerged. The air inside the stone passage felt entirely different from the air in the house behind them. It was colder, denser, almost metallic in a way that made Lara's breath tighten in her chest. The silence inside the narrow throat of rock seemed alive, as if the walls held memories of every person who had ever walked through them. For a moment, she hesitated at the threshold, her flashlight trembling faintly in her hand. Sam stood so close behind her, she could feel his small breaths fluttering against the back of her jacket. This was the first time since leaving the car that he seemed truly afraid, and the weight of his reliance pressed against her ribs. She took a careful step forward, then another, her shoes scuffing softly against the uneven stone floor. The carved stairs rose at a slow incline, rough and primitive, each step uneven in height and width. It looked as if someone had carved them one by one, using nothing more than determination and crude tools. Lara moved slowly, pausing each time she felt Sam wobble behind her. She kept her free hand on the wall, its texture gritty and cold beneath her fingers. "Mom," Sam whispered, his voice thin. "Do you think someone's up there?" She wanted to lie, wanted to reassure him with something comforting, something purely maternal and protective. But in this tunnel of earth, with the darkness pressing on them like a second skin, honesty felt necessary. "I don't know, sweetheart," she murmured. "But we'll stay together. And we'll be careful." Sam nodded, though she could hear the tremor in his breath. Her own heart thudded too loudly in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. They continued their slow ascent, the light from her flashlight bouncing along the stone walls and deepening their shadows. Halfway up the tunnel, Lara paused. Something about the air changed. It wasn't a sound, more like the absence of sound, a sudden stillness that prickled the back of her neck. She tightened her grip on the flashlight. Sam sensed it too. He clutched her arm, his small fingers digging into her sleeve. "Is someone watching us?" he whispered. Before Lara could answer, she forced herself to call out, her voice unstable but steady enough to carry through the passage. "Hello? We're not here to cause trouble. If someone can hear me, we're just hikers. We don't want to hurt anyone." Her voice rattled off the rock walls, traveling upward into the unseen darkness. For a moment, nothing answered. She felt Sam hold his breath. Then a voice drifted down to them. Soft, trembling, but human. "Only if you promise." The words echoed strangely, repeating themselves, as if the earth itself wanted to be sure they heard. Lara froze, ice sliding down her spine. Sam buried his face briefly against her arm before lifting his head again, with wide, frightened eyes. The voice had not sounded threatening. It had sounded lonely, fragile. Lara swallowed, steadying her breath. "We promise," she called, quieter this time, the words catching slightly on her tongue. "We're not here to hurt anyone." Silence stretched between them again, long enough that Lara wondered if she'd imagined the voice entirely. Then, at last, "Come up, then." Slowly. Lara squeezed Sam's hand and whispered, "It's going to be all right." Whether she believed it or not didn't matter. Her son needed to hear it. They continued upward, each step pressing them deeper into the unknown. The tunnel widened slightly as they neared the top, the air becoming warmer, tinged with the faint scent of wax. The halo of dim orange light reached them before the chamber itself did. And then, as the staircase curved one last time, the space opened up before them. The chamber wasn't large, no bigger than a modest living room, but it had clearly been shaped by human hands. The walls, smoothed more carefully here, were carved into gentle arcs. A small wooden table stood at the center, upon which 2 candles flickered, their flames dancing in the still air. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt rested against one wall, and a handmade shelf containing a few books and jars leaned against another. Everything was clean, though simple, lived in, though sparse. And standing near the far end of the chamber were 2 figures. An elderly woman with silver hair tied back in a loose braid and steady, tired eyes watched them with cautious curiosity. Her clothes were worn patched trousers, a faded sweater, boots scuffed from years of use. Her thin hands rested at her sides, though tension stiffened her posture. Beside her stood a man slightly taller, equally weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and his shoulders broad despite his age. His eyes were sharp but not unkind, and his hands large, toughened from years of physical labor, were relaxed at his sides. The man spoke first, his voice gentle. "You came a long way to find us." Lara felt her breath catch in her throat. These were the people from the photograph. The same faces, older now, carved by time and solitude. The photograph had shown them frozen in a moment of warmth and sunlight, standing in front of the house, when it still sat proudly in a forest clearing. Seeing them now, in the flickering candlelight of an underground chamber, felt like stepping into a past that had stubbornly kept breathing. Sam pressed himself against Lara's side, but his fear was softened by fascination. Lara rested her hand on his shoulder protectively. "We didn't mean to intrude," Lara said quietly. We "We found your house. We thought it was abandoned." The woman exchanged a glance with her husband, then stepped forward with a soft smile. "My name is Helen," she said. "And this is my husband, Marcus." Lara introduced herself and Sam, her voice steadier now. Marcus nodded politely, his gaze lingering on Sam with a gentleness Lara hadn't expected. He gestured to a pair of wooden stools near the table. "You both look like you've had a hard climb. Please sit. There's no danger here, as long as you meant what you said." "We did," Lara said. "We promise." Helen observed Lara closely, as though inspecting not her words, but her heart. Whatever she found in Lara's eyes seemed to put her at ease. She took a seat on the edge of the bed, while Marcus leaned against the far wall. "You must have a great many questions," Helen said softly. Lara hesitated before whispering, "Why are you here? Why is your house down there?" The couple exchanged another look, one filled with old pain and the weight of choices that could not be undone. Helen took a slow breath and began. "Decades ago, this land belonged to us. We built our house by hand. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We lived simply, quietly, away from the noise of the world." Her eyes glimmered faintly in the candlelight. "Then the corporation came," Marcus continued, his voice firmer. "They bought up the land around us, promised jobs, development. At first we didn't mind, but then they wanted our property too. They claimed it wasn't safe for us to stay. They tried to persuade us with money, but no amount could replace what we'd built with our own hands." Helen's lips tightened. When persuasion didn't work, they changed tactics. Marcus nodded. "They began excavating the land around us, at first slowly, then more aggressively. They said it was for surveying, for groundwork. But we understood what they were doing. They were isolating us, making it dangerous for us to remain, trying to force our hand." Helen clasped her hands together, her voice trembling slightly. "We refused to leave." Lara felt a shiver of disbelief. "So you stayed?" Marcus nodded. "And when the ground around us began to give way, we made our decision. If they wanted to cut us off from the world, we would finish what they started. We reinforced the crater walls ourselves. We moved the house piece by piece down into the basin." Lara stared at them, stunned. "You moved the entire house?" "It wasn't easy," Marcus said with a wry smile. "But hardship builds strength, and stubbornness builds a home." Helen let out a soft sigh. "We carved these rooms in the rock. They keep us warm in winter, cool in summer. This chamber is our sanctuary." "And the outside world?" Lara asked quietly. Helen's expression softened with sadness and acceptance. "We left it behind. A trusted friend brings us supplies once in a while. But mostly, it's just been the two of us, and that has been enough." The words hung between them, warm and fragile. Lara felt something shift inside her. Sitting in this hidden chamber, surrounded by the proof of devotion and resilience, she felt her own fears reflected back at her in a new, humbling light. The couple before her had chosen trust in each other, trust in their love, despite the world trying to break them. And what had she done? She had run. She had assumed the worst. She had chosen fear over faith. Helen's gaze softened as she watched Lara's expression change, as though she could see the thoughts flickering through her mind. "Sometimes," Helen said gently, "we trap ourselves long before the world ever tries to trap us." Lara lowered her head, feeling the truth settle deep in her chest. Sam leaned against her side, unaware of the adult emotions weighing on the room, but somehow sensing that this moment mattered. Marcus stepped toward a shelf and reached for a small carved object. It was a simple wooden token, smoothed by years of handling, shaped like a small bird in flight. He held it out to Sam. "For you," he said. "A reminder that even in dark places, you can rise." Sam accepted the figurine with wide eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Helen approached Lara, her step slow but steady. She reached out and held Lara's hands between her own, the warmth of her palms surprising. "You have a heavy heart," she murmured. "But heaviness can be lifted. Trust isn't built by being perfect. It's built by choosing truth over fear." Lara felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back, nodding, swallowing the lump in her throat. "We should go," Marcus said softly, "before the light fades outside. The climb up the crater is harder than coming down." Lara and Sam stood, thanking the couple with genuine gratitude. Helen pressed a gentle kiss to Sam's forehead, whispering something only he could hear. Whatever it was, it made the boy smile softly. Lara took one last look at the chamber, at the candles flickering against the carved walls, at the quiet life the couple had built despite everything. And she felt something shift inside her. Something like forgiveness. Something like clarity. Something like the first breath after being underwater for too long. They stepped back into the tunnel, and as the darkness wrapped around them once more, Lara felt lighter than she had in weeks. Sam held her hand with quiet confidence, and somewhere deep in her heart, a fragile but unmistakable certainty began to form. Whatever happened next, she would face it. Honestly. Fearlessly. With the truth, not the shadows she once let rule her, as Lara and Sam stepped back into the stone passageway, leaving behind the soft glow of the candlelit chamber. The air seemed to shift around them. The warmth and quiet strength of Helen and Marcus remained like an imprint on Lara's skin, a subtle vibration that traveled with her as she began descending the stairs. Her flashlight cast long, trembling shadows across the uneven stone walls, but the darkness did not feel as intimidating as before. Something inside her had changed. Something subtle, yet profound. The weight she had carried for weeks no longer pressed on her chest with the same suffocating heaviness. It lingered, yes, but now it felt shapeable, something she could finally confront. Sam walked beside her, holding her hand with renewed confidence. He seemed calmer than when they had climbed up, as though the presence of the elderly couple had soothed him in ways Lara couldn't fully understand. He kept turning the small wooden bird in his fingers, studying its smooth lines, the gentle curve of the wings. Lara stole glances at him, marveling at how children could absorb wisdom without question, how they could be transformed simply by witnessing kindness. The tunnel felt different now. Before, it had been a place of uncertainty, dark, tight, and filled with dread. But on their descent, the space felt almost welcoming, as if the walls recognized them. The cold air brushed past them like a sigh, the kind that follows after a long-kept secret is spoken aloud. The stones under their feet no longer seemed hostile, but rather worn by purpose and resilience. Lara found herself thinking about how these very stones had been carved deliberately, patiently, by two people who refused to be driven from their home. Those chiseled steps were more than a path. They were a testament to strength, to stubborn devotion, to unyielding love. When they reached the small chamber behind the pantry door, Lara paused. They stepped into the kitchen once more, and the contrast struck her sharply. Just minutes ago, the room had felt eerie, unsettling, like the remnants of a life caught between time and silence. But now, after meeting Helen and Marcus, the kitchen felt grounded. Human. A space loved and lived in, even if not in the way she had first assumed. The apple on the table no longer appeared unnatural, but simply a relic in a preserved life. The half-eaten sandwich no longer seemed like a sign of something sinister, but a quiet fragment of routine. Nothing looked threatening anymore. Everything looked intentional. A piece of a life sustained in secret. Lara brushed her fingers over the tablecloth, feeling the stiff texture beneath the dust. In another context, she might have felt a pang of sadness at how the room sat suspended in time. But now she saw it differently. It wasn't neglect, it was preservation. A life that had grown two separate layers, one above ground, left frozen for outsiders to find, and another below, vibrant and continuing for those who had chosen it. "Mom," Sam said quietly, tugging at her hand. "Are we going home now?" "Yes," Lara whispered, surprised by how emotion tightened her voice. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." The house felt still as they crossed through it, but no longer oppressive. Lara paused at the fireplace, lifting the faded photograph once more. The faces of the younger Helen and Marcus looked back at her, frozen at the front steps of a home, standing tall in open sunlight. That house no longer existed in that form, yet the soul of it remained alive, hidden, carved into stone, nurtured by love. Lara returned the photograph gently. Something inside her whispered that she understood now, that running away from fear only drove her deeper into loneliness. She had allowed insecurity to cloud her judgment, allowed silence to fill the space where trust should have lived. She had been unfair, not because she was unloving, but because she was afraid. And she was tired of being afraid. She guided Sam through the doorway and into the crater's open bowl. The sunlight had shifted since their descent. The shadows were longer, the air cooler. Their climb back up the crater wall stretched above them like a daunting task, far steeper from this angle than when they had come down. The slope seemed almost vertical in places, and the loose stones glimmered faintly under the sun, as if daring them to attempt the ascent. Sam stared upward with wide eyes. "Mom, this looks harder." Lara squeezed his hand. "It is harder, but we'll do it together." They approached the incline slowly. Lara tested the ground with her foot, searching for the most stable foothold. The earth shifted beneath her slightly, unsettling her balance. She planted her hands to steady herself, feeling the grit press into her palms. Sam moved beside her with careful steps, mimicking her movements. For a moment, the two of them were simply climbing. Mother and son, side by side, no fear, no rush. As they progressed, the climb grew more challenging. The earth crumbled under even the smallest shift, forcing Lara to adjust her angle, sometimes leaning forward to grasp jagged roots, sometimes reaching back to help Sam maintain his grip. She heard his breath quicken with effort, but he didn't complain. His determination warmed her, bolstered her, and in a strange way it gave her strength. Once, she slipped slightly, her foot sliding down a few inches. Sam grabbed her arm with a gasp. "Mom!" "It's okay," she said quickly, though her heart thudded from the jolt. "I just need to go slower." Sam nodded, looking braver than she felt. They climbed for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes stretched by labor and intent. With each step upward, Lara felt the symbolic weight of each movement. Every push forward was a decision, every grip an act of faith in herself, every breath a reminder that she did not have to remain stuck in the shadows she had created in her mind. When they finally reached the rim, Lara pulled herself up onto the forest floor with a deep, exhausted breath. She lay back briefly, feeling the solid earth beneath her. The forest canopy swayed gently overhead, the breeze tugging at her hair. Sam scrambled beside her and flopped onto the ground, panting dramatically. "We made it," he said, beaming despite his exhaustion. Lara smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "We did." Sam rolled onto his stomach and peered down into the crater. The house looked impossibly small from that vantage point, almost like a miniature model placed in the center of some silent diorama. The crater itself appeared deeper, darker, more foreign than when they had first stumbled upon it. But something inside Lara shifted. She no longer saw it as a place of fear, but as a place of truth, a place that held up a mirror to everything she had been avoiding. "Mom," Sam said quietly after a moment. "Do you think they'll be okay down there?" Lara looked at him, seeing in his young eyes the first trace of compassion that would shape him for years to come. "Yes," she said softly. "They will be okay. They've lived their life the way they chose. And we were lucky to meet them." Sam nodded thoughtfully and let his gaze drift to the trees again. Lara sat up slowly, brushing soil from her palms. The forest seemed brighter now, as though the world had shifted subtly back into balance. Their return journey through the woods was quieter than before. Sam walked slightly ahead sometimes, stepping confidently over branches and stones, his wooden bird swinging from his fingers. Lara followed, absorbing the serenity that surrounded them. She noticed details she had ignored earlier: the subtle curve of the path, the gold streaks of light filtering through leaves, the rhythm of the breeze brushing through the treetops. It felt like the forest had wrapped them in a cocoon, leading them gently back toward the world they had left behind. With every passing moment, Lara felt her thoughts returning homeward. The guilt she carried still pulsed within her, but it was no longer a paralyzing force. Instead, it urged her toward something she should have done long ago: talk, listen, understand. Daniel deserved that much. He deserved honesty, and so did she. By the time they reached the car at the forest's edge, the sun was dipping low, coloring the sky with soft hues of gold and rose. The quiet hum of insects welcomed them back to the world of ordinary concerns and familiar rhythms. Sam climbed into the back seat, clutching his carved bird. Lara sat behind the wheel without starting the engine yet. Instead, she rested her forehead against her hands and inhaled deeply. She pulled out her phone and checked it instinctively. No signal yet. She started the car and began driving along the same cracked road that had brought them there. The moment they reached a stretch with a faint signal, her phone buzzed to life. Dozens of missed calls and messages flashed across the screen, all from Daniel. Her heart tightened as she read the first few notifications. Concern, worry, apologies, pleas for her to call back. She pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder and parked. Sam looked up curiously, but she smiled to reassure him. Then, with trembling fingers, she pressed Daniel's contact. He answered on the first ring. "Lara? Lara, are you there? Please, please, tell me you're okay." His voice cracked with a mixture of relief and fear, and for the first time in weeks, Lara truly heard him. Not the imagined stranger she had built in her mind, but the man she had loved for years. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm okay. And I'm sorry." Daniel exhaled shakily, the sound echoing through the line. "Just tell me you're coming home." "I am. And I want to talk. Really talk. I think I owe you that." He didn't speak for a moment. When he finally did, his voice was soft and full of something like hope. "I'll be waiting." Lara ended the call, her heart full and trembling. She looked back at Sam, who grinned widely, sensing victory without knowing the details. "Dad's happy you called," he said simply. "Yes," Lara whispered. "He is." By the time they reached home, evening had fallen. Daniel stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn from worry, but his eyes softened the moment he saw Sam's joyful sprint toward him. He picked up their son, hugging him tightly before looking at Lara with a mixture of longing and uncertainty. She approached slowly, then stopped just a foot away from him. All the words she had rehearsed tangled in her throat, but she found the simplest ones first. "I made a mistake," she said. and I want to fix it." Daniel reached out and took her hand, his touch trembling. "Then let's fix it together." Later that night, when the house fell quiet and Sam slept peacefully, Lara sat with Daniel in the living room. They talked not around their fears, but through them. He explained the messages, the late-night calls, the secrecy. He showed her the emails about the anniversary gift he had planned, the receipts she had never bothered to look for. And Lara apologized, not just for the fight, but for letting fear dictate the story she had chosen to believe. When she finally lay in bed beside him, she felt a sense of relief, unlike anything she had known in months. It was as though she had climbed out of her own crater, leaving behind the shadows and stepping into the world again, choosing trust over fear. As she drifted to sleep, her last thought was of the silent house in the forest, standing quietly in the pit of earth. It did not need the world above to thrive. It had found strength in its hidden place, shaped by hands that refused to give up. And she wondered if maybe that was the lesson she was meant to find all along. That love, like a hidden home carved into stone, survived when nurtured, endured when protected, and healed when it was chosen anew. The forest had given her a secret, not one she needed to keep from the world, but one she needed to keep inside herself. That sometimes, to rise again, you must first descend somewhere dark and quiet and rediscover the truth waiting inside you. And in that truth, Lara finally found her way home. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe and share this video, and check out the next videos on the channel. Your next story is waiting.